Okay. We're still collecting our folks. I know several more said they would join us. We are in expectation that Baker Curris will be able to join us while traveling. His analysis, I think, impressed us a great deal. I hope that you got the midweek material I sent you and last night's draft letter and summary. That's what the basis will be for our activity here. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Bear with me. I'm getting a word from a. Okay. Not gonna get anybody from Wright Avenue. And refer her to the draft last night.
Baker has joined us.
Oh, great. Great. Welcome, Baker Curris. Baker, we can't hear you. Unmute. Let's see. Do I unmute people?
Did that work?
There you go.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry.
I do the ear flap. That means somebody needs to unmute. really high tech there.
How's everybody?
Doing well, thanks.
Good.
Hope
Good
you're
to see you,
traveling
Ron.
fun place.
Norman, Mary.
Can you see the participants list, Baker?
I can see some of y'all's beautiful faces, but I can probably roll up a few more. I can see everybody if I scroll, but
we got 10 people in the meeting right now.
Good.
Which is a nice bunch. I've just had one regret, but I was afraid of that, shall we say. And I'm going to say, let us honor the hour that we pledged on this holiday weekend with this fabulous weather. So let us begin. I am Kathy Wells. I am president of the Coalition of Little Rock Neighborhoods. We are here meeting by Zoom with our dues-paying delegates and members and a few guests. Our guest speaker today is Baker Curris, former school superintendent, former school board member, former candidate for mayor, whose analysis of the proposed city sales tax this week brought out a number of important policy points that I think we care about. Last night, I sent to our members a summary of various pieces of research and a draft letter that we might send to the mayor and the board. I hope to hear from everyone by this evening so we don't delay getting our meeting comments into the folks timely before they vote on Tuesday. Baker, let me just start the conversation with you by recognizing that you had brought up an issue that had escaped notice. We all were wondering about early childhood, and you made a good point about that. Nobody had been looking at the rising personnel costs and a few other things that you talked about would be better attended before any sales tax was enacted. We have been looking at our debt burdens on our citizens, which matches with your concern that those least able to pay would be most heavily burdened. But let me just ask you, at this point in your analysis, what is your conclusion about the way forward?
Well, of course, you know, I don't run from higher taxes. I really don't. I've supported just about every tax increase we ever come across. And I guess I want to live in a high income, high tax place, you know, where we got plenty of money and the people that have the most of it can share it so that all of us can do well. My fear is that we've sort of, we're throwing money at problems, and that never seems to work. We've got a lot of money. We tax at the highest levels in Little Rock, and my preference would be that we try to before we ask for more money, we try to do the things that we're going to have to do anyway, which is become more efficient and effective, more tuned in, less administrative, less top heavy. And then maybe if we need more money, go get it. I'm in favor of the infrastructure tax, but I'm not in favor of a huge tax increase on top of what we're already doing when it's regressive based on sales. I don't like sales taxes that much. And then I don't like the policy process of sort of throwing things up in the air and then dealing one-on-one to try to garner the votes. That kind of log rolling troubles me, but so I'm very concerned about it.
Do we have some comments from the group?
Well,
I need to figure out a way. Mary, excuse me, Mary, can I get everybody's faces up here? I'm sorry. Tech is hurting me. I'm sorry. I'm not, bear with me. I'm trying to get, well, that didn't take me where I wanted to go.
If you go to view, gallery view, you'll probably get everybody's faces. And I want to thank Baker for his careful analysis and
That's it. Thank you.
of the situation.
Thank you.
Norman, now you were about to speak.
Well, again, thank you, Baker, for doing this because I think it's very helpful. I can truthfully say that I know about 3 people who are in support of this tax at this point. And so the large majority of my friends and acquaintances and colleagues are not, principally because of the lack of additional infrastructure. There's simply too little infrastructure funding in this proposal. And getting into 529 programs is something that I don't think we need to be, the cities have any responsibility or need to do, quite frankly. And so that's sort of the view here, but it does seem to me that the City Hall has increased a good bit in the personnel level in recent years, and that needs to be addressed, I think.
Who next?
Well, I guess the thing I'd bring up here is that, you know, the big picture for me is that the bottom line is no on the sales tax, period. I don't think there's any sense in talking about individual components on it. It's a repressive tax. It falls most heavily on the disadvantaged. We're taxing water, we're taxing electricity, we're taxing food, we're taxing all these essentials. And then we have these loopholes in there so that a person who pays, who buys a $4,000 Mercury will pay the same $37.50 sales tax to Little Rock as a person who buys a 400,000 Maserati. You know, we need to go through that sales tax thing and find all the loopholes and close those things first. And we have to stop doing the city giveaways to Maumelle and Kamek Village and Amazon. We have to start charging for the fire services, the 911 services, the radio services. Charge fair and reasonable prices instead of subsidizing the suburbs. So I'm really opposed to kind of getting in the weeds with this thing and say, oh, put some here, put some there, put some there. No, it's a bad idea. Increasing the sales tax is a bad idea, period.
Kathy, may I?
Point of information, let me just call on Jim Lynch next, but the car tax that Dale refers to, I looked into that. That is a state law. It's been in place for decades, and it's basically the state is only letting the city and the county have a small bit of car sales taxes. So we have not any possibility of collecting more, no matter what the vehicle. We can go after other things, but that's not one of them.
the state taxes the full 6.5%.
Yes, and they take it to their bosom and they only let the city have a sliver. And that's state law.
Well, I think then what we should do is talk to our state legislators and say this is something that they could go ahead and actually work on that would make a lot of sense instead of a lot of the other things they've been working on.
They've tried for decades. It's one of those things, the fix is in, shall we say, with the folks at the State House.
Yeah, Dale,
I
if I
doubt our
might,
legislature would be doing anything with that.
yeah. Yeah, Dale, if I
Yeah.
might, some of us are burdened with experience. I've been watching city finances for almost 4 decades. That provision about cars and so forth was adopted to make sales taxes go down a little bit better. See, there was a time 40 years ago when cities weren't allowed to adopt sales taxes at all. None. The only people that could adopt a sales tax was state government. And so when they opened the door a crack and said a city council by referendum and public vote can adopt a sales tax, you know, and this was a huge change. And then sort of to take the edge off some of it, things like used cars, and there's a lot of used cars sold in the state of Arkansas, they put in some provisions to make, you know, the castor oil go down just a little bit easier. So that's what that is about. That's not it's not objectionable. The cities were so hungry to get into the sales tax games that this was not objectionable. It's still not objectionable from the municipal policy point of view. So I appreciate your pointing it out, but they are not going to change that. If I may, I'd like to point out a couple of things. I'd like to echo what others have said. Baker's done an excellent look over on all of this, but you know, there's no strategic thinking on this. As Baker points out, I think the number that he came up with, this is a 42% increase in the general fund. That's huge. That's huge. This is $55 million every year for 10 years, almost $500 million. Now look, I'm exactly like Baker. I'm pretty much pro-tax. I like to have things in the community that increase the quality of life, our health and prosperity and so forth. But honestly, the city has been after a sales tax on and off for 40 years, ever since the first law was adopted. In fact, the first law was adopted in 1980 in May, and by June 1st, the city had a sales tax on the ballot within 30 days after never having a sales tax. But nonetheless, all the other discussions about raising the sales tax have been, whether by design or not, they've been thorough. By the time the tax reached the ballot, it was vetted. The community knew what was happening and so forth. That is not the case here. This, from the get-go, has been, I hate to say this, but it's so shallow, it's artificial, and it's just a bunch of labels. Point number one on the early childhood. Well, who can't be for early childhood? All the research shows that kids at the younger age, if you can get to them with basic skills and so forth, it improves everyone's life and future. But when I think of city government, and I think about it quite a bit, I think of police and fire and streets and parks and picking up the garbage and code enforcement and so forth. Pardon me, early childhood education? This is a shift from the basic mission of what municipal governments do under Arkansas law. We have something called the Little Rock School District. They've got an early childhood education. President Biden, I think, has got something in front of the Congress for universal early childhood education. All that is important, and it's important to discuss. Apparently, we're not discussing this at all in Little Rock. We're just, picking July 13th, throwing it on the ballot, and see if any of it sticks on the wall. That is not how we ought to be doing either short or long-term planning for the city of Little Rock. The other thing is the package leads with parks. I am certainly an advocate of parks. I think most of us are. But back to the sales tax game, there are a variety of sales taxes available to city councils in Little Rock, and one is a specialized sales tax for parks only. It was adopted 20 years ago. You can put it on the ballot. If the voters approve it, it goes for parks and recreation, community centers, parks improvement, development of new parks, you name it, trails, and so forth. It's a two-year sunset. You can have the Parks Law sales tax for 24 months, and then it expires. But if that were to happen in Little Rock, at $55 million a year, that'd be $110 million. That is a huge amount of increase for the Parks Department. I kind of think I might be for that. You could actually split it in half, use $55 million for capital improvements, put the other $55 million in a fund that you can draw the interest off of, and it would be annual income for the Parks Department. And so there's a solution there. You've never heard about that. You've never heard about that so far in this discussion. I could go on about this, but this is, the mayor, unfortunately, has just thrown a bunch of labels up in the air, and there's no detail about any of them. I don't understand, if we were to get into early childhood, who would run it? How are we going to staff it? Where's it going to be? That's extremely important. I said I was favorable toward the parks idea, but if we're going to spend tens of millions of dollars a year more on parks, exactly for what? I'm a user of parks quite a bit. We've got a favorite family pet dog that it's my responsibility to walk him all the time. So we go to the parks. The parks, of course, this is the growing season and the weeds are coming up and the sunshine and the rain and so forth. But it's been pretty clear, not only for this year, but you know, as until memory runneth to the contrary, we don't mow the parks often enough. They don't look good enough, in my judgment. So are we going to buy additional staff and get them on those bush hogs and lawnmowers and so forth? Sounds good to me, but nothing's been said about that either. Are we going to improve community centers and so forth? Some a little talk about that, but you know, nothing's been put on paper. In fact, almost nothing has been put on paper besides a couple of sentences for each of these categories. That is absolutely not up to standard in the way we have conducted business at City Hall for the last 45 to 50 years, and we shouldn't accept it. And finally, and here's something that I can't do anything about because it's just apparently is what it is, but the mayor's handling of this discussion in front of the city board doesn't pass the smell test. This is a big deal. This is a very big deal about putting, you know, $500 million on the ballot for the next 10 years. And when it came down to advance the proposal from first reading to second reading, you all know how that works. It's got to have an affirmative vote to do that and so forth. And so he asked for all in favor say aye, all in favor say no. And he said motion passes. Well, if it hadn't been for Lance Hines, the vice mayor, calling for a roll call vote, this would already be on the July 13th ballot. Because when Director Hines said, pardon me, Mayor, because the mayor declared the ayes to have it. You know, just the sound. The ayes have it, next. And Director Hines said, no, I don't think so. I want a roll call vote. Well, guess what? When you call the roll, the nays had it. So what is the mayor up to? In fact, he did this 2 years ago on something that was very important to the coalition on the modification of the rental inspection program, where we went to the group sampling, where we can sample 20% of the apartments and so forth. It took years to get the code enforcement staff to agree to that. And we finally had the language in front of the city board. And here it was, the roll call vote. And somebody wanted to delay it one more time after, 3 years of discussion. And I was down there as the voice of the coalition that night, and the mayor calls the roll. The ayes have it. We're going to delay it another 6 months. Well, one of the city directors said, I don't think so, Mayor. I want a roll call. Well, guess what? The nays had it. And so we turned to a real discussion of the rental inspection enforcement rules that night, and we got it adopted. So I don't like the odor that I'm getting from the mayor's handling of these important votes. It's pure political manipulation, and I don't like it.
Thank you, Jim. Robert Walker has his hand up. Robert? Unmute,
Thank
Robert.
you. And I hope, Jim, that when you go to the park, you take a pooper scooper with you, because we certainly don't have enough money to maintain the parks. But speaking as a member of my neighborhood association, individually, me, we have perceived that there are certain things we want. We think they'll be good for the city. They'll certainly be good for us. And I don't want to vote for anything unless the city acknowledges, yes, my neighborhood needs another park we can't afford, and we need a route to the river trail, and the topography favors this. It's an excellent idea. Even if they don't have any money for it, I want them to acknowledge it and say, yes, we will work towards this as time and money permits. And then we'll just be bargaining for money from forever from this time on. And that's basically it. I think that my neighborhood has to say, we're going to stop on everything, because we have so many active people in my neighborhood who do great things. And I believe as good citizens, they try not to push their own agenda. So my neighborhood suffers because they will not put forward something that favors my neighborhood because they know it favors where they live. So that's all I'm going to see right now.
Well, Robert, you could get your parks and your trails and all that for Rose Creek with that 2-year park sales tax. There's no question about it. I think that probably would get a hooray from most of the citizens in the city of Little Rock. And by the way,
it hasn't happened. And Mr. Nolan, I believe the guy back in the 1920s, whenever he was, said it would be a great place for a park. Nothing has happened since then.
Well,
there is
a solution to it, but you haven't heard anything from the mayor about it. We haven't discussed alternatives. We've just discussed labels coming out of a printer from a computer keyboard.
Well, also, one of the things that Baker Curtis brought to our attention, which we have always been quite concerned about, which is that right now we're looking at a lump sum tax on the ordinance, which is the legal functioning operation. The resolution where they slice and dice it to this percentage of that, or that line item that we've seen, the revised line item where they give a little bit more to public safety infrastructure and a little bit less somewhere else in this obscure thing like information technology, none of it is binding. Basically, if this goes on the ballot as the ordinance has it today, you're giving them the literal blank checkbook. And so we need to be concerned about that. As Jim says, in the past, you put items on the ballot and you voted. I seem to remember 10 votes for Little Rock at one point, and there were 10 line items on the ballot. So that's one thing to be very attentive to. By the way, some of these questions I have sent on to the mayor and his staff. No answers have come back detailing any kind of further information. So they are not responding to straightforward questions about, tell me more about this and that. Let's see, did John Hedrick have his hand up? I wanted to call on somebody else next, and I think I've lost track. Who was it wanted to speak next? Please speak up.
This is I'll speak just for 2 seconds. This is Luke Kramer with the Hillcrest Residents Association. Just generally, I mean, look, we tend to be an area that votes for most taxes. We tend to be pretty high on the list of those who are supported. But just generally, I've found about 98% of the people I've spoken to are not in favor of this. So I think one person said, we should be, why are we worried about painting the walls whenever the toilet's broken? That there are some, I think, some more substantive issues happening with our city rather than having a lit fest. So I think that the spirit of this particular tax is not being supported. We kind of drilled down with Kathy and Mary Julia Hill and some others in our and Kathy's ward, kind of drilled down into the numbers one day, but just kind of backed out and realized that there's just generally no support for this. So just to let you know from our constituents in this area that so far we're just not finding any support. And I won't go over the reasons. I think they've already been stated here today, but they are what you guys have stated so far is generally the same conversations I'm having. So thanks for letting me speak for a second.
Thank you. Let me also give you I'll get to you right away, Norman. A practical application of our concern about the way this is coming. If indeed the mayor gets his vote Tuesday, and this goes on the July 13th ballot, this is a classic of politicians that has worked for many decades, and that is you call a special election on a tax or issue of concern in the hot summertime. Everyone's off on vacation. They're not attending to this. The advocates for this tax will turn out their 3,500 votes. This will be settled on a very few thousand votes in contrast to the numbers you're used to in the general election. If in fact, we may not well have a coalition resolution that takes a position on the tax, we typically leave it to the neighborhoods, but we raise a lot of critical questions to enable the neighborhoods to come to their own conclusions, very thoughtfully informed. And if that's the way we're headed, we're going to need to sign on to some real vote turnout, because it's going to be a downhill slide to victory for the proponents because of all these human activities that keep people from getting to the polls on election day. So keep that in mind. It's going to be hot and it's going to be work.
Yeah,
That's where we're headed.
Yeah, Kathy's absolutely right. You're probably looking at, if this were held on July 13th, you might get 7,000 votes and you only need 50 plus one vote to win. You need 3,500 votes to pass this. That's what he's doing. And then the other thing is, and I didn't bring it up, but I will now, since I love the zoo. I want to go on record. It's great. It's a great educational facility, but it has now gotten to the point where someone needs to strategically say, what is the city of Little Rock doing, trying to hear their rhetoric and their promotional materials and so forth? Why are we trying to run, a first-class zoo when we've got all this other stuff to do? Now, I stand to be corrected, but years ago, someone did an analysis of the turnstile tickets that you go into the zoo and, you have to turn in when you pay your money. Well, over half of the turnstile tickets were bought by people outside of Little Rock, which means that we're running a statewide facility. Okay, now, if that's what the citizens of Little Rock want to do, and I don't know the history of the zoo, probably got started in the 1930s or something like that. We've just done it ever since. But about every 10 years, and it happened in 2011, when Mayor Stodola got the big 1 penny and so forth, but there was this constant barrage from the zoo people. Oh, we're going to lose our accreditation. Oh, we're about to. They even came out a year before the tax saying that there was going to be a meeting of the National Zoo Association, the accreditation people, and that they weren't going to get accredited, but they were going to be reviewed for perhaps being disaccredited 2 years later. So that's the kind of hysteria we have gotten, and we're getting it again. 10 years later, oh, we may not be accredited and so forth. Well, you know what? What if we ran an unaccredited zoo? I mean, does anybody going to the turnstile really care? I can make the argument, I think, that the city of Little Rock ought to sit down with the state government. It's in War Memorial Park. The stadium is a state facility. All the real estate around there, I think, belongs to state government. We either need state government help to run this zoo, which is a statewide facility, or we just ought to just, you know, it's a great zoo. I don't want to diminish anybody's hard work on it today, but maybe there's what's it called? The Arkansas Department of Tourism, Parks and Tourism. Maybe they ought to run the zoo. They've got much deeper pockets than the City of Little Rock General Fund. And maybe that's the discussion that ought to be held. And you know why he's made the zoo the big leader on the ballot and so forth? That's because he wants those 3,500 votes on July 13th. He knows they will turn out.
Point of information, Jim. That's actually a question the mayor answered once upon a month. And I said, it was a private conversation. Why not turn this over to the state tourism board? And he says, Kathy, we don't want to give up the revenue. So he views it as this wonderful cash cow for the city.
Well, come on, Mayor.
You know, he's not hating
The zoo is a lost leader. We don't make any money on the zoo. We spend more money than we take in. There's no net revenue put into the city general fund because of the zoo. We're taking money out of the general fund. That's why they want the tax.
Remember all those statewide visitors? Look at all the money they spend while they're here visiting the zoo. It's like all those other development arguments. But Norman, let's hear from you.
Well, yeah, and I disagree with Jim wholeheartedly on that. That is an economic factor in Little Rock's general economic makeup. We are the only zoo in the state of Arkansas. So that if you're coming to Little Rock and you've got kids, you may want to go there, you're going to shop, you're going to do whatever. I disagree. I don't think it needs as much money as is in this proposal. But I do think the zoo is an economic
I'm not arguing that, Norman. The zoo is not going to go away. It's just a matter of who runs it. It's either going to be the city of Little Rock or someone else.
Again, I think if you want the revenue, the city is going to have to run it. And with regard to accreditation, you can't get animals if you're not accredited. I mean, you can buy them off market, but you're not going to do anything with them. So, I disagree that the fact that the zoo is something that doesn't deserve additional money. It does. It just doesn't deserve as much as it's proposed to get here. So,
and let's remember they've explicitly said they want condos for the giraffes. We have nothing to tell us what this housing redevelopment line item is in their particular write-up. I've asked for that and I've gotten nothing back. So there's a lot in here that we need to know before we could change our position into a much more positive one, I think. Who else has a comment here?
Baker.
Could I say one little thing, and I'll be very brief. And Kathy, you mentioned it, but the thing that's so patently obvious to me is that none of these revenues are going to anything necessarily. And that because the resolution, the third one, says this is a declaration of intent. And because of budgetary reasons and state law reasons, you can't budget out 10 years on a general budget. The policy-making body of a city is the city board. And so they'll have to pass budgets every year. And there's no guarantee that the zoo would get a penny or anybody else would get a dime. I mean, that's what I don't like about, I'm sort of like Lynch. I want a plan, I want a strategy. And then the second thing, and I prove this at the school district, before you ask for any more money, prove you're spending what you're getting wisely. And the best way to do that, and I would ask y'all, that's why I really appreciate this group, because you're thoughtful and detail oriented, but look and see if our head count is staying the same, are we terminating people who actually do things and hiring supervisors. And I've got a lot of experience at the Little Rock School District. And let me tell you what, when I got there, it was stunning. I cut 22 million bucks out of the budget, and nobody missed it because nobody quit doing the work. All the workers were still there. The only thing we lost were middle management people, very highly paid. And that's what's happening in the city. I mean, it's getting pretty crowded down there. We're adding people, and you know, I don't know. I'm not trying to make a big issue of that, but honestly, if you start adding $100,000 positions, supervisory positions, you need to ask yourself how come, because those things add up. And then once you can say, honestly, we're spending our money wisely, then if we need more money, let's go get it. But it should be a bottoms up process, not a top down process. It should bubble up from people like you who say, you know, I wish the parks could get mowed more often, and I would support that. Or I wish my street was paved better, or I didn't have potholes, or I had more police patrols. I just think the policy making process is bad. This log rolling where you tweak something in order to try to pick off interest groups is really unfavorably. I'm not disposed at all favorably to that. So, but that's a couple of thoughts, Kathy. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Excuse me. And your comment about just talking about police in terms of more patrols, there's a great focus in the public news accounts about more police and public safety. But this group has always been very thoughtfully focused since the 90s on the phrase, as much for prevention as punishment. We have always strongly supported community policing. It has been in decline, and the notion that they might put some more money into that is welcome. But then I think we need to ask a couple of more questions. And I would welcome anybody else who has been digging into this particular category. We have all been painfully struck by the series of these young teenagers who pick up a gun and they go to a public park and they fire off the gun and bystanders die, or even plus their target. Because of the lockdown, we've had no chance for the police to discover that they are talking amongst themselves and working up to this and setting up a conflict. We have, from the 90s, if you'll recall, a really big push to get guns out of the hands of teenagers. Jim, do you suppose Paul Kelly might be brought back to opine about what we need to do today to get guns out of the hands of teenagers today? I think we need to be addressing more policies than just a few more folks in patrol cars. But
well, let me
respond
to that, because I don't want more people in patrol cars necessarily. I just want more people out of the police central office. I mean, do you realize that more than half of the people that work for the police department don't do anything where they go out into the public and do things? I mean, that's crazy to me. I don't want people out, jackbooted cops out there swinging clubs and shooting at people. I think the exact opposite. I like the idea of police officers in the community knowing who their constituents are and working cooperatively to make things better. But our police department now is so heavily burdened with people that are riding a desk. I just think it's a huge expense. And then you don't have any leadership in a department when you you got to solve these problems. Morale in a police department is more important than how many police cars they drive around. It's an organization that has to function as a entity one unto itself, and that's the kind of unity we need. But I agree with you. I'm not looking for cops to be driving up down the street swinging billy clubs. That's the wrong approach.
Well, and as I might, this only goes back about 18 months, or 2 years. That's how long the mayor has been in office. But the big deal when he came in was 100 new cops, right? That was what he campaigned on. And so I among others did some research and channeled to some of the city board members. As it turns out, all the cities that Little Rock compares itself, Jackson, Mississippi, Springdale, Dallas, you know, Shreveport and all this. We have more cops than any of them per capita already. And so the point was, Mayor, you know, what's the point of all these new cops when we're already at the top of the list? Now, this notion of community policing is way overdue in Little Rock. We've been talking about it for 30 years. There was something back in the 1990s called RAP, Residential Area Patrol, which was essentially the cops getting out of their cars, getting on foot, knocking on doors, introducing themselves, and trying to establish a relationship with the neighborhood. Excellent idea. I know they do it a little bit, but it still is not embraced as a departmental philosophy as far as I can tell. And so this notion of more police, and when you think about it, you know, more cops in the police cars and all that, it's all reactive. It's all after the fact. Crime's already been committed. Now we're chasing down the bad guys. We need to stop crime before it happens, which is what the community policing is all about. Have you seen anything on this ballot or in this discussion about what the mayor or the chief or the leadership level of the police department defines as community policing and how they're going to do it and what the strategy is and what the expectations are? Nothing.
Yes, Jim, as a matter of
That's
fact,
what I
that's
mean.
line item.
That's what I mean, that this proposal, this whole package is just so artificial and so shallow that it's really not, it's not worth our discussion until they can come up with the detail. This policing, as you know, is a huge issue. It's a huge issue. It may be that we don't, in terms of crime prevention, it may be that we don't need a lot of people in uniform with billy clubs. We may need other kinds of people. Hadn't heard any kind of that discussion in Little Rock, though.
No, but they've got a line item for $1 million a year for community-oriented policing on their list.
And what does that mean? And what does that mean to Mayor and Chief Humphrey? You don't know.
That's exactly right. We do not know. And we ought to find out. And I don't want to be a scaremonger here, but my reading of things has brought me a lot of information that I'm tracking from national and international groups following right-wing extremism in the United States, and the analysis about infiltration into policing units and the concerns that ought to be addressed about whether your police force has got these paying members, card-carrying members of some of these groups that show up on the evening news committing violent acts. And I always carefully send those off to the chief and some other folks I know in the department who discuss things with me off the record. I'm very grateful for that. But what was an unpleasant jolt last week was somebody leaked a report that got to the Manchester Guardian in England, and it named cities, and it named those lists of explosive devices that had been recovered from all these street violent acts. And son of a gun, Little Rock, Arkansas was named in that report because from that big protest in our streets that came out January the 6th, there was basically a Molotov cocktail device found. And that was meticulously recorded and included in this overall evaluation about how widespread these kinds of right-wing threats to public order and willingness to use explosive devices on the streets of the city have gone. And that's not out there in the public debates, and I'm kind of not jumping to do that because that's so easily distorted and overheated. But I want you folks to watch for that and consider what the police need to be doing to gather information, what we might find out in our own networks to forward to the police to combat that in our community. Thank you. Who else has got discussion on the sales tax? Have you had a chance to look over the letter? Do you agree with the tone that we just urge them to take more time to discuss this? And we need more details. And we need to know what that 15-acre downtown park would be. I have a feeling that's the city on the hook for where they're taking out the Kendall Road ramp to I-30, but I can't get anybody to tell me what that is.
Kathy, if I might, I don't know if it's in your draft letter or whatever, but there was some newspaper report circulated in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, part of the federal recovery from, the pandemic, the virus and so forth. Little Rock is slated to get how much? $37 million, is that correct?
Oh, yes, that is fact. It's going to come in 2 installments in this month of May, potentially within the next week. They're going to get a $17.5 million check for the federal pandemic relief aid to the city of Little Rock. And then 12 months out from the date of that check issue, a duplicate $17.5 million will be issued to the city of Little Rock. So a year from now, I am working hard to get the guidelines on how that may be spent or what is excluded from it. And I don't have anything yet, but I was gratified to see when I raised that point in the last letter we sent to the city board that Dean Campuris went into the public discussion raising that question about whether they should hold off on any sales tax until they have taken in this one-time money and discovered how to spend it and used it for relief of issues pressing against the city right now. And he's right. That's another good reason in and of itself to hold off on this. Now, I'll grant you that if they don't get a vote by September, they don't have their sales in order to impose a new sales tax that would kick up January 1. So they've got a window that's closing, but of course, July 13th isn't August 13th or later. And in any event, we could come back around to a year from now, they're going to get another wad of one-time money. And the first thing on this list is an $8 million fire station for West Little Rock, one-time money. Maybe they ought to buy themselves a fire station with the federal pandemic aid, take it off this line item, and then spend more on housing rehabilitation for low-income families. That's the kind of debate it would be good to have.
34 million is a ton. 37 million is a ton of money. And this goes to the institution we know as the City of Little Rock Municipal Government, right? I mean, this is
exactly.
This is not going to be spread around among, other organizations. This goes to the city general fund.
Exactly.
Well, we need to hear a whole lot more about that.
Well,
Yes,
we could
we
include
do.
something about that in the letter.
Well,
yes, it is in the
but-
letter.
yeah, but
Oh, it is in the letter?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. It was in the last one. I can put it in this one.
yeah.
You're right.
And in fairness, I know Mayor Scott doesn't run federal policy coming out of the White House, but the truth is, these are two huge. His 55 million and Joe Biden's 37 million. Those are huge amounts of money. There needs to be a discussion on how those two can be made to work to the maximum benefit of the community. And this whole thing of rushing to the ballot and getting this done and getting that done, and we'll fill you in on the details later, it's just a non-starter in my judgment.
And keep in mind that the city revenues did not take the big hit that everyone feared. When I talked with an official about revenues, they lost $8 million because they closed revenue generators like the zoo and the community center activities and so forth. But $8 million out of the budget of the city is bearable hit. And offsetting it was they're on bended knee that they got the national sales tax in place because everybody buying from Amazon rolls money into the coffers. So when you look at the city budgets and the city incomes, before the pandemic and during the pandemic and now coming out of it, resuming a little bit of normal local revenues, they had a very narrow escape, but they did escape the worst of it. And my realtor friend points out that we're in a housing bubble. So if you're looking for that economic measure, everybody is trading like crazy and nobody's suffering. You have to go into your low income analysis. You have to go into the folks who have delinquent utility bills and back rent owing to get at a segment of the population that is in real trouble. And the cutoffs are now resuming for those utilities. So they are going to be in real trouble within the month, because yes, there is an installment plan. I got that researched. That's in my document last night. All the utilities have delinquencies. All of them offer you a installment plan to not be cut off. But let's face it, you're supposed to pay the current bill for May, then you're supposed to get with them and set up a 12 to 18 month installment plan to repay what you didn't pay all last year, which is going to be crudely, you're going to be paying 150% for your utilities, probably all of them, not just one of them. And gas, electric, water, sewer, trash, that adds up. This is not a population that can stand any new taxation. And of course, embedded in those taxes are some taxes that go back to the city anyway.
Yeah.
And that has to be our role, is to say about the lowest income, the worst hit, the debt burdened.
Yeah. One last point on Baker did a real good job of drilling down on some of the numbers, but one thing did get my attention. I think Baker cited a statistic where it used to be that personnel cost as a percent of total costs were about, what, 2/3, and now they're up in the low 70s, 71, 72, or even maybe mid 70s.
Yeah, mid 70s, 76% this year.
76%. Well, not only is the top heavy point that you made, I think is well grounded, but I hadn't really made a big deal out of it because, you know, people's eyes glaze over it. But Bruce Moore became city manager in 2003. And within, I mean, a couple of months, all these headlines, oh, he's the hero and all this. Well, you know what he did? The first thing he did was when he was interim city manager, and then they made him permanent city manager in 2003. He, in effect, settled a working agreement with the firefighters union. Okay, we need firefighters. And, you know, they've got their prerogative to have their collective organization and so forth. But the big point was their annual pay raise for a period of 2 or 3 years into the future and so forth. And it was a handsome percentage. And if you compare what Bruce Moore agreed to compared to real inflation, firefighters were making out like bandits. And that was just 2003, 4, and 5. Look at 6, 7, and 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Same with the FOP. What has happened, in my judgment, and I've got the detail, nobody has time to read it, but what we've done is we've baked about $2 million worth of general fund expenditures into the budget. We have committed to pay these uniform folks, and they do good jobs. I'm not diminishing their work. But again, as Baker pointed out, we've got to be able to look the voter in the eye and say we're making good use of the money we've already got. So when you bake in $2 million worth of pay raises into the general fund, because once you commit it to it, if I say I'm going to raise your pay 2.7% next year, I need to do it. And then the next year we're negotiating again or whatever the agreement is. But now, let's say in the following year, I'm going to pay you 2.1%. Well, it's 2.1% on top of the 2.3% the previous year. It's compounding, which is why we're now at 76% in my judgment. And so I asked on that first firefighter pay raise, The number was never, it was just like, there was an announcement one night, the firefighters have agreed, isn't it wonderful? Everybody gets up and cheers. Bruce gets slapped on the back. There was never any number made public about the cost to the taxpayer. I finally had to ask Barbara Graves at the time, who was on the board, I said, would you please get the number from the finance department about how much this pay raise is going to cost the citizens of Little Rock? Had to wait 4 or 5 weeks to get it, but $737,000 cost to the general fund for the raise to the firefighters. Nobody ever said anything about it. You never hear about how much money these pay raises, and they're above inflation. Go consult your CPI from 2003 to current. Until very, very recently, inflation has been low, even below 2% in some cases. We're giving raises significantly above that.
Well, there's a lot there to dig in. I would welcome people to send in emails circulating amongst ourselves. We've all got the address list, and share this information. Obviously, the shorter the better. We tend to get so enthusiastic about our discoveries that we want to share every last detail. And I know we need to respect people's time and energy in delving into this. But let's work a little bit more about sharing the information that we find and suggesting that leads the coalition to a conclusion about raising these policy points at city board meetings and writing these letters to the mayor and the city directors and releasing these letters to the media. Because this is, I think, a role that we can play properly. Does that meet with willingness amongst the group?
Well, we need to ask all the questions we
Kathy,
possibly.
I have a question.
Yes, Norman.
Are you just doing a general letter? Or are you going to want something much lengthier to go into detail to go to the city? To the mayor?
I was ready to take your direction. As you could tell, I squashed it on the page. And I would probably go back to the previous letter that I sent in, and I haven't had any response to, where we're raising some of the policy points, like about the federal aid. That was a good thought, and I will include that. I am going to be striving to keep it to one page to the mayor and the board. I can go further. Direct me.
You know, I think the board members are more likely to be responsive at this point, I think. In terms of the infrastructure, I've noticed you said, you talked about that, but I just think starting the word with there appears insufficient funding for future infrastructure improvements, or something more strongly along those lines.
Do you realize how far short this all falls against the needs list? If you put a column down the page that says what the public works engineers and all those professional staff finds for crumbling this and never built sidewalks that. And this goes back to the last sales tax. I got them to give me that list. And I'm pretty sure we're in the same situation today, because it's what happens with city governments. At the time that we were talking about a modest increase in infrastructure, we're now coming up to year 10 of funding something year to year, and everybody's had a chance to do a really good participation and urge that their street and their particular issue be addressed and their drainage ditch closed. So that the system has some good positive points to it. But at the time that they were dealing with this, we had $500 million on the needs list. And somewhere back there, I wrote a contrast with what the tax was going to pay for and what remained never addressed. We're going to be in the same situation this time around. And in fact, yes, I need to ask for that. Ask the current full needs list from Public Works. Because what we're going to see is we have got so much more to do. And remember, we also are concerned about the 7 equal wards allocation because we have got them piled higher in wards 1 and 2 than we do ward 7 or ward 5. And that is an equity issue that I think we could agree to press again. So I will work on that. Thank you, Norman.
Well, yeah, I just think that's a crucial part of this because there is certainly insufficient money to deal with the overwhelming. And just if you've taken 10 years of inflation, I know it's been minor, but it's still at least 10%. And plus the fact all of the other stuff that has come along since then. I mean, I can tell you for a fact there are major infrastructure issues in the Heights that we have talked to the city about for years. There's no money to spend the $500,000 to fix that bridge. You know, well, that's the question that this comes down to in my mind is insufficient funding for infrastructure improvement.
There's no question that we'll always be chasing a moving target that will be vastly greater than any sum they're willing. Let's face it, they're talking about 50 million a year. They're talking about $500 million as we've seen the added up to it. They could put every dollar of that into public works, into streets and drainage, and we would still not fix it all.
Well, maybe,
That's
maybe
an
all
issue
that,
to keep in mind.
yeah, maybe that goes on the $37 million federal checks we're going to get. Let me say one thing. It's not off point, but it is on point in my judgment. Here we are talking about a very fuzzy, ill-defined proposal to increase the general fund by 42%. No detail, hardly any discussion, ram it through the city board, all that kind of thing. What's the mayor going to do? Here's what Little Rock ought to be doing right now, the discussion. What's the mayor and the city board going to do to get 85, 90% of our citizens vaccinated? That's the real, I mean, if you read, it almost makes you bring to tears that our communities, and I'm including all the nations, we've got this vaccine resistant. It is a huge public health problem. I looked at a number last night. The latest number of deaths for COVID in the United States is 581,000. You know how many people we lost in World War II by combat deaths? 407,000. COVID now has killed more men and women in the United States than we lost in World War II in battle. And we can't bring ourselves to go get a shot.
Jim,
Little Rock could lead the way. Little Rock could lead the way by getting ourselves up to 80, 85, 90% vaccination. That's what ought to be done. We'd have people moving here so fast we couldn't beat them off with a stick.
Well, now that they've opened the community centers, it certainly is a question we can raise on behalf of the coalition about what rules they're operating for admitting vaccinated people to the ball games they're about to have for summer programs or promoting shot clinics. You'll remember if you went to a Travelers game this week, they offered you a shot on the sidelines.
Yeah.
Certainly, if they're running youth programs, the same thing surely would be a question to raise. Thank you, Jim. I'll work on that. Okay, what from anybody else? Denise, yes.
Kathy, you asked about the format of the letter to send.
Yes, please.
And I don't know that you received a consensus or that discussion finished up. How about if it was a cover letter with a subsequent list of questions?
Okay.
Like with an appendix that covered the questions. That way you're not trying to jam too much information or bringing up new questions within the letter itself. The letter could be relatively brief, like Jim said, to start off saying that there's just insufficient information here to justify approval of this tax increase. And then the appendix that page 2 could begin the list of questions.
Oh, I like that. Yes, I will take that advice. That nicely divides it, gives them a chance to absorb one thing and then go on to the next. Thank you. I will do that. Any comments from anyone else on the letter or the structure? Are we good sending the letter? Ron?
Absolutely. Send the letter.
Okay. Ron?
Yes, we've had a lot of discussion about infrastructure. Just what does that entail? Because on the national level, there's a lot of discussion about, well, people questioning Pete Buttigieg and him trying to expand on more than just roadways as part of infrastructure. How does that relate to infrastructure monies locally?
Good question. I've had no indication. The wider group is analysis coming from the Biden administration is reflected in anything local. As far as I've ever heard, infrastructure means the Public Works Department as it has up to this point. It means streets and drainage. And while they've got a really good number for a block of paving a street or putting in curbs and gutters, every drainage issue needs to be engineered. There is, for example, part of an open ditch running alongside Martin Luther King Drive in my neighborhood, my boundary to my neighbor group. They've in previous years covered over a little bit of it. A lot of it remains open. It is a hazard. It is a disease brewer of mosquitoes. And if we're going to suggest anything in one-time spending with this federal aid, I'm going to suggest that they close in that ditch. Norman, it sounds like your project needs to be analyzed and a price tag put on it. And they've not done that. They won't do that.
The city's already given me a price tag.
Oh, you have a price tag. Well, you have advanced.
Well, yeah.
Because a lot of this doesn't have one.
Well, I mean, granted, it was a general one from them, but it was, it was going to be plus $400,000.
Yeah. So they knew what it minimally was, and then they do some calculations for in today's dollars with today's asphalt price and so forth, whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the national level.
We've reached our hour limit. Do we have any final comments, Ron?
Well, on the national level, they're talking a lot about mass transit. That's considered part of infrastructure. Are we going to look at some of that money going into our mass transit system?
That's a good question. Yes, I think I stuck it in there, but I will certainly make sure that it's in there. And I may.
Can I ask the one educational expert in the group a question? Mr. Curris.
Yes, sir.
This category of education, preschool maybe not be the right word, but I'm generally thinking early childhood and so forth. Now, lots of families, in fact, most all families use some kind of preschool something, but my impression is it's mostly daycare. So from the professional education point of view, if we're going to take kids at a very early age and start to, head them in the right direction toward their academic skills, we're talking about real teachers, are we not? Not babysitters.
Well, yes, Jim. The first I heard about this was that it was going to be pre-K education, which is very, very much different than what we commonly call daycare, or even sometimes called preschool. Pre-K education is what you get if you go down to Geyer Springs Educational Center, or you go to Fair Park, or you go to Rockefeller. You have certified people who are trained to teach children skills in a very particular way, and they are very well trained. They're very well supported. They need a great deal of time and space to do those things. They have to have a series of support personnel. You have to also one of the most important things in a real serious pre-K education environment is to be able to identify special needs and be able to address special needs very, very early. So there's a very large component in our community at both at the pre-K centers that I helped organize, the very strong component of identification of special needs and deficits in education. It's a state responsibility pursuant to the Constitution. It ought to be funded on a statewide basis. When I was superintendent, I expanded pre-K education to the maximum extent that we could afford, and we added over 300 pre-K seats in 1 year. That's where it has to go. Now, if you want to have a preschool program where you incentivize or you subsidize people who work and need preschool daycare, so to speak, that's the program I think that the city's describing now. Last thing I saw, and again, there's no detail. There's nothing you can really look at, but what I saw was that people might get a voucher to a preschool if they were at a level of 3 times the poverty level. That would mean a family of 4 would, and I'm assuming some things here, but if you had 2 kids in a family of 4, which is the way the federal government looks at it, that's not the way life really works anymore. But if that were the case, someone who was making $78,500 under the last program I saw vaguely described in Little Rock would get a preschool voucher. But there's a vast difference between a preschool where it's basically just funsies and juice boxes and playground time than a real serious pre-K education center. And if you want to see some of the very, very best, Little Rock got started at Hall High School a long, long time ago. Some of y'all will remember. John Pagan's mother was a leader in that. And then we had Rockefeller, then we had Fair Park, and then when I was there, we started Geyer Springs. Those things cost $7,000, $8,000 per student.
A year.
A year. Oh yeah.
Well,
Closing in on the end of the period, I respect that we've got to let people go. One other concern that we need to probe into is if the city's handing out vouchers based on a family income, that voucher could be given anywhere, including private academies. Keep in mind. So we need to decide what we think about giving them out anywhere, or whether we are going to focus on the public school district and its existing programs and expanding the funding for those existing programs.
well, I actually, Kathy, I mean, those are good issues, but I'd hold off on that. I mean, the mayor hasn't defined what he's talking about. He's just done a label. He's got one.
Keep it in your mind. You're right. I would not put that in the letter, but do keep that in your mind.
His own program.
Yes, he does. And that is an issue too.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Baker.
Thank you, Baker.
So much.
Thank you so much. It's a real treat to be with you guys. I passed up on I'm here for a wedding, and my wife was very understanding to allow me to spend this time with you rather than go to a brunch, but I've enjoyed it quite a lot. Thank you.
You need to get to the ceremony.
Thank you, Baker. Thank you all for participating. I'll get this letter out, and I hope everybody has a chance to put through it before you get off into your holiday activities. I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned and urge everyone to communicate by email subsequently. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good meeting.
Good meeting.
Mary, I'll stay with you to the last, and then we can close it. Let's see.